Takes. I'm JJWalsh in Hiroshima, and today I have two co-hosts.
No, no.
Usually me and Tova are doing this one. We have a special guest, James Hollow, today. Thank you so much for joining, James. You want to quickly introduce yourself?
Thanks very much, JJ. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's James Hollow. I'm the CEO of Fabric, based here in Tokyo.
Tova, you want to go?
Fantastic. Yep. Hi, and I'm Tove Kinooka. I'm based in Yokohama, just outside Tokyo.
So we are three people two in Tokyo and me in Hiroshima, all kind of focused on sustainability in the kind of consulting work and different advising roles that we have. And today we are talking about some news points and interesting innovation and books in the last 10 minutes. So please stick around. It's only 30 minutes. We got a lot to cover. Tova, you want to start with your news about Starbucks?
Yeah, okay. So Starbucks have, at the end of last year, opened their first, what they're calling greener store in Tokyo. And it's got it's very beautiful to look at, as you can see there from the pictures that JJ's showing. But it's aimed at reducing waste. So the idea is that it generates 40% less waste, 30% less carbon emissions, and consumes 20% less water than other Starbucks locations in Japan. And Starbucks as an organization has been doing a lot actually on their sustainability footprint, their targets. And the idea is they want to reduce carbon emissions, water usage, landfill waste by 50% by 2030. So this is looking towards that. And they've got all kinds of interesting things they're trying out in this store. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows that, you can take along your own cup, tumbler, whatever that you want to call it, to Starbucks and get it refilled. But there are always those days that you forget it, or you've got your water in that and you wanted a hot coffee or something. So they've got this tumbler return system so that you can actually just borrow one from there, take your drink away and then bring it back later. They've got things like the floor tiles are made from coffee grounds and things like this. So it's the system that they're using, but also the actual structure of the place as well has really been thought through very carefully to reduce waste and water usage and carbon emissions. So very interesting to see how popular that will be, how much people will engage with the sustainability aspects of it. So I'm looking forward to visiting that soon.
Yeah, it looks great. I love the high ceilings, the use of natural light, the big windows, all the wood, as well as all the ideas that they're bringing to the forefront to kind of make it a flagship, great example of what they want Starbucks to look like in the future. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And the picture you're showing just there, the pieces hanging down, the artwork there is sort of made from repurposed, I think, fabric from clothing, from jeans and fishing nets and things like this. So they've been really creative in the approach they've taken here.
Tova,
wow, that's great.
do you know if the prices are kind of aligned with the standard sort of Starbucks store prices, or is there a bit of a premium?
As far as I know, they're standard. So I haven't had the chance to actually go there yet. But there was no mention of them charging anything different to their standard Starbucks stores. So as far as I know, it's the same.
It's really interesting whether consumers are prepared to pay a green premium.
Right.
We're starting, it's something that we do a lot in our work, and looking at the sort of price and value propositions. You see that a little bit with Patagonia when you factor in how much effort they put into their sourcing and their repairs and that whole side of things.
Yeah.
You can look at it, what is a pricey price point for a jacket as actually really good value. But it would be great to see a leader like Starbucks sort of show that kind of model. I was reading recently about true pricing, where if you genuinely bring in all the externalities and internalize them into a business and then reflect the price the cost. How much would that be for a price of for a cup of coffee? And I think some work done in Europe said it would be like an extra euro. So actually not necessarily something that Japanese probably pay some kind of premium like that already, and maybe it's something that more people would be prepared to pay.
Right. So,
well, one other nice feature that I know Starbucks Japan has just changed to is the plant-based milks. They used to charge a little bit extra for plant-based milk, and now it's the same price as normal milk. So that kind of links to your idea about the premium pricing for green. I mean, we are, if it's organic, we're willing to pay a bit more. We know it's better quality, but having consumers that understand why you should pay more for more sustainable products is part of the educating the consumer hurdle, right?
Very much so.
I think Starbucks are one of, if not the world's biggest distributor of milk. Obviously, you've got the coffee, which they work quite a lot on, and is quite in people's minds these days for sustainable supply chain. But then obviously working on the store, and the amount of plastic and stuff that gets used only once. But then actually milk has a massive footprint associated with it, and so I think lots of brands having to work pretty hard on the particularly greenhouse gas emissions with dairy, right, and also other land use issues.
Yeah, very much.
And I'm glad to see vegan vegetarian options now in Starbucks Japan. For a long time it was nothing, not even things. This kind of connected to my news for Hiroshima, broken by Get Hiroshima, which my husband and I started. Yay! New Muji flagship store is coming to Hiroshima, and this is a really big deal. We don't have like zero waste shops like you might see around Tokyo, where you can take your own container and refill by weight by the bulk bins. So this is the first big brand to do this in Japan, and it'll be a nice big store in Hiroshima, a really nice big store. They also have detergents, so you can refill your own containers. I was so jealous when I visited California and I talked to Recycle Center in Recology, and he was saying he's used the same laundry detergent for container for 10 years. And I was like, I wish we could do that in Japan. We just can't yet. And they're also selling houses and giving ideas about sustainable remodels as well as sustainable housing, which is exciting. They also are taking old clothes and other things that you can recycle, old books, CDs, and DVDs. It doesn't have to be Muji brand, which until now has been. They're also going to be a sponsor, a source for MyMizu, if you're using the MyMizu app, as you can refill your own water bottles. And lots of great ideas. So that's exciting to see.
Fantastic. Now that's a huge step forward. And I think, the refillable containers in Europe, that's fairly common. And it sounds as though in the US as well, certainly in particular areas, that there's a lot of that available. But it's something we haven't seen much here. And it requires quite a mindset shift on the part of the customer. So it's interesting, James, you were talking before about, whether people are willing to pay a premium for, a green product. Here you've got not just paying, it's not about paying a premium. It's actually the inconvenience, if you like, of having to take along your own packaging and, remember to take your bottles to refill and things like that. But if we can get people to make that mindset shift, then the impact can really be quite considerable. So it's great to see that happening.
Exactly. No, that sort of slight increase in inconvenience as a price people are willing to pay for feeling a lot better about their consumption. And I think this is something, it feels like a very natural brand extension for Muji. And you almost think, well, at last, it's the sort of Muji have had a really strong, brand that sort of feels sustainable. I know they've been working on some stuff in that area for a long time, but at the same time, I did feel like it's about time some of these Japanese retailers actually make some bolder steps. Uniqlo have done some work around their supply chain, around plastics recently, etc. But really, no one really showing the way. So it's great, the two examples that have just been shared. It'd be great if they can then, really put pressure on the competition to step up and
absolutely,
expanded to all of their networks.
I think connected to the price point, idea too is a lot of people complain about, I want to try the zero waste bulk food idea, but why is it more expensive than buying the one with the container that I just throw away after? So that whole concept of, well, it might be better quality, there has to be a reason that the people are going to go through the hassle of bringing their own container, right? It has to be higher quality, longer shelf life, healthier products, something like that, right?
Yeah,
I think that, the research we've done would suggest that less than 10% of people would be the ones who'd be, who'd care enough to bring their own tupper. Now that might, that's changing relatively fast, but it's a minority unless you build in those other benefits, like quality or health benefits with it, or maybe some loyalty scheme, additional points, things like that can sort of appeal to a bigger chunk of their customer base.
Very much so. And I think the
Muji,
whole, sort of really using media here, the social media particularly, the influence that can have if you get sort of social media influencers out there talking about this, taking their own containers along and refilling. That, again, I think particularly with the younger generation has a huge potential to impact. So it would be great to see Muji perhaps working with some influencers in Japan to get the message out there, make it cool, let people know what's happening and really sort of tap into that side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, James, your news update is about targeting the commercial side of the fossil fuel industry, about targeting the media and how the media is promoting or the new wokeness or the kind of false narrative of the fossil fuel industry. Is that right?
Exactly. So the fossil free media and groups like them are basically targeting, often through legal means and legal actions, companies which are associated with big negative impacts. So let's talk about big oil, for instance. And they've been trying to put pressure through legal means or through eroding the social license to operate in countries like the US and in Europe. And I think, in my mind, the sort of theory of change that is going to be a really key lever, that sort of social license to operate. And it's often, trying to shame the executives who are probably, grey-haired white guys who have children who are maybe more progressive and liberal minded, and sort of almost shaming them into taking action. I think also if you look at, there's been a lot of trying to shame, let's say, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, have had quite big holdings in emitting companies which are responsible for large emissions. And they've defended that by saying, well, this gives us a way in and leverage to talk to them. And I think that's pretty much, I think, washed. That's been a solid argument. I mean, I'm not completely okay with that, but I think what's just happened, and this is the news story, is that they've basically been targeting Edelman, which is the world's biggest independent PR agency, who've been working with Exxon and other fossil fuel companies for many years and has helped them become such a big successful company. And now these groups are targeting them, saying, basically, you've been helping to greenwash. And this is really, I come from marketing communications in a previous world, and that's been a very Edelman's had such a clean brand, such a strong brand, and so this is a real sort of quite an interesting turn of events. And they've been forced to defend themselves, and their defense is, well, actually, we haven't been telling any lies, and we feel that it's better to be working with these, i.e., the same argument that these these foundations have had. And so the activists have turned around and said, yeah, we understand your argument, but how long have you been working with them, and what has actually changed? Not enough, right? And so basically that means that everyone who works for Edelman is now thinking, yeah, I used to think this was a really good company, but now I'm not so sure whether I should feel so good about working here. And that's a big problem for that employer all of a sudden. And they're having to come out and defend themselves. And what's interesting, and this is linked to Japan, they've got a whole list WPP, when the first company I ever worked for, is really high on that, and actually the Dentsu Group as well, which is obviously headquartered in Tokyo, one of the world's biggest sort of marketing conglomerates, and they represent lots of these big fossil business models, and so I'm thinking this is an important mechanism in the West, if I could say that, in Europe and the US, to sort of challenge that social license, to erode their business model. So they can't get access to those creative talents, it's going to really hurt them. Now, I wonder how quickly that sort of effect might happen in Japan, where there's probably less of a activist mindset, but there's actually a much tighter labor market. And often the people working in that area they might be bilingual, and they have lots of choices about where they want to work. And so I see, one of the levers that is going to really help shift things in Japan is actually employer brand choice. With this really tight labor market that we have, despite the relatively sort of, let's say, weaker sort of activist mindset. Yeah, what do you
That
guys
is
think?
such an important point. And I think Tove and I have touched on this before, how impressed we are when we go to a hotel or a business and you ask any staff any question about their sustainability or their policy about operations, and every staff knows it, right? Having your employees who are invested in the company mission, especially if it's ethical or sustainable, and having your employees proud of where they work, that's massive. That's a great way to improve your brand, right?
Very much so. We were talking to a client last year, actually, a sort of luxury brand group in Japan, and they were saying that the director of HR was telling us that when they're interviewing younger people now to come and work in the organization, he said 90% of them will be asking in the interview, what are you doing on sustainability? And not what are you doing at a global level? What does it say on the website that looks and sounds wonderful, but really doesn't impact very far? But what are you doing here in Japan? And how does that connect into the operations you have here? So I think it really is a very, very relevant question, and it relates to the article you're just showing now, which was from last year in HBR, but sort of again connecting into this Seidou Gap. A lot of companies, the vast majority of global organizations now and listed companies are doing fairly in-depth ESG reporting, sustainability reporting, which is fantastic. But when you look back at since this all started, sustainability reporting, sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago, very little has changed. Emissions have still gone up. The damage is still continuing to happen. So if this is being measured, why is it not reducing here? So there's still that gap between, companies saying, well, right, we've tick that box, we've done our sustainability report, we've said we've got targets, but unless they're actually taking action that will start to reduce the damage they're doing both socially and environmentally, they're going to get called out on this. And I think the media is an incredibly powerful force in that. So relates very much to what you were talking about as well, James.
Yeah, and exactly, it's all interconnected. I think what in the end Richard Edelman came out and said, well, we've actually done an investigation, we found we haven't erred in terms of facts, but we have actually, his words were, what we found there was a lack of context. And what he's talking about there is basically, let's say Exxon buying some, let's say, startup company that's using algae to create ammonia, which can then be used as a kind of clean biofuel. And then they do a great campaign about that and kind of, essentially make it look like that's a big part of their story, whereas actually it's still 0.1% of their business.
Right.
And that's, so this is a dilemma that we face in in communications and consulting, where it's like you need to help these companies who are trying to shift by highlighting the steps towards that. But then if you do too good a job at that, you give people the wrong impression. That it's a big part of what they do, and that's that does amount to greenwashing. And I think that's what this is coming to. And similarly to your point, action needs to be showed, but it also, the context is what proportion to actually other actions like doubling down on your, the old model, the
Yeah.
extractive model. And that's something that I think is really part of the next phase of corporate communications and telling stories about brands, is trying to build in that context to the stories, or in some way. And I don't think it's been solved yet.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
My mom knows I'm a collector of mugs, and she sent this to me, and this is a great example of how fossil fuel companies are trying to brand as if they are great promoters of heritage and culture, especially with indigenous cultures. And then if you think about it, you're like, that's just so wrong, because the indigenous groups are probably the most damaged by their activities. It's like when you see the chicken yakitori place and the happy chicken holding a butcher's knife. Like there's a real clash there with what you're showing me and what the reality is. Like, let's think about how we are, communicating to our potential customers here.
Yeah. And I think people are getting a little bit more savvy about this now. The fact that media is out there and stories can break in, minutes and spread like wildfire across the world. Before they might have got away with this a little bit more easily, but I think nowadays, people can find out quickly actually what is happening under the surface, and this can, this information gets out there so quickly that they cannot afford to be, blindly sort of telling little stories that seem wonderful on the surface, but don't have any substance underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings me to my book recommendation, which I think we need a bit more time to talk about our books. But connected to the same idea, this is an amazing journalistic project started by Ian, I've forgotten his name, Urbana. And he started this, The Outlaw Ocean. He wrote a book. He did all these journalists, amazing adventures out on the open seas. And it's not only about sustainability in terms of the environment, it's very much about sustainability in terms of people and human justice. And there's so much that nobody is watching out on the seas. And so I've ordered this book, really excited to get it. It also, part of this project, he's funding loads of journalists to keep investigating all these great stories that really need more awareness. They're doing collaborations with musicians, putting together some of the clips from the videos as part of the music that's being made around the world. Really interesting project. Really excited to be able to talk to Ian Urbana as well in the talk show next month sometime. So stay tuned for that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. James, you want to talk about your book?
Sure. Thanks for sharing. That one looks really interesting, JJ. I'm looking forward to that. As you say, it's something that we haven't really incorporated into our thinking here in Japan, where I think life under the ocean is in the top 5 of things Japan needs to shift. Japan, obviously one of the biggest consumers of fish, and has lots of destructive effects, but I don't think it's really filtered through into the kind of the social the mindset in Japanese society yet. So it'd be great to get some of those stories told here.
Yeah, we know that around Japan has one of the highest percentages of plastic in the waters around Japan in all of the world, and Japan is a huge consumer of plastics. So from an environmental perspective, it's a huge problem from Japan and around Japan with fishing industry. But he also covers about shipping and about the use of slave labor, and there's no one really policing, and there's so many variety of amazing topics that you would never expect coming out of this book. So I'm really excited to dive in.
Looking forward to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it available in Japanese as well, Joy?
I ordered it in English, but on the website, it's got a variety of languages. I'd be surprised if it's not in Japanese. I'll check on that.
Yeah, it'd be great to see it available in Japanese as well.
James, you want to introduce your book?
Yeah, so actually, when Tove told us just before that she was going to be talking about fungi, I couldn't resist but slip in The Hidden Half of Nature, which isn't a new book, but I caught up and read it over the Christmas New Year break. And It's basically the hidden half is microbes, bacteria, mainly bacteria, but they would include fungi. So I'll leave that bit for you, Tove. But it's one thing that really opened my eyes to is just the importance of bacteria to the human health, which is obviously very, very topical at the moment, and just how important actually the bacteria in our guts are to our immunity. And so the authors are a married couple called David Montgomery and Anne Bickley. He's a geologist, she's a biologist, and they basically embed this really educational content in a life story about them moving to a new house in Seattle, transforming their garden, and at the same time Anne getting cancer and having to basically change her lifestyle to be more healthy, particularly through diet. And it turns out that they basically link this story really nicely together through the importance of bacteria. And they show how basically food which is really healthy and nutritionally dense comes from soil which is thriving with life, mainly microbial. And they go into this beautiful symbiosis between plants, bacteria, and mycorrhizal fungi. That's basically the source of the nutrients that we eat, either directly when we eat vegetables, or indirectly when the things that we eat the vegetables and the plants, i.e., grazing animals. So that was a real, really interesting to read. But then also this idea that they did this beautiful sort of analogy where they said the roots, if you can imagine it, our guts are kind of like the inverse of the roots of a tree, because the roots of a tree surround themselves and actually feed bacteria in order to promote them and give them help them thrive, because they then go out and work with the mycorrhizal fungi to bring nutrients to them, which they use then to grow and thrive. And we do the same in our gut, just inside. We actually feed bacteria in our gut through we release basically food for them, and the good ones, and that keeps the bad ones and other threats to our immunity basically outside of our system. It just really made me sort of aware of just actually how much we are yet to understand scientifically or incorporate into our lifestyle in terms of sort of knowledge. And there's this kind of
Isn't that true?
yeah,
Yeah. And it feeds into a lot of what organic farmers always say about the importance of soil and doing composting and feeding back into soil. And it's all part of a healthy vegetable, but also our healthy lifestyle is very dependent on that health of the soil as well. Tova, your book was also connected to the soil and fungi, Entangled Life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is a book by Merlin Sheldrake. I think it was released last year. He is a fairly young biologist working. He's graduated from Cambridge. He's now working overseas in sort of institutions in South America and digging through the undergrowth, looking into fungi there. And anyone who knows me would probably be laughing at my choice of book, actually, because I actually don't like eating mushrooms, fungi. I really dislike them. I always have, much to my parents' horror, because they love them. And I've always known that I studied them as part of my biology degree as well. Mycology was, a fairly significant part of that. So I know, understand that they're incredibly important. As James was describing, they're all around us. They have this symbiotic relationship with the plants and the animals and with us as well, and are very, very important as part of that ecosystem. But this book is it really digs into to look at the details of that, and actually how much, just as you were saying, James, we don't know yet. There are thousands, tens of thousands of species of fungi, many different classes of them as well. There are the mushrooms that we see, which are the fruiting bodies of them. There are molds. There are lichens, which are a sort of another part of it again. But they said we only know probably around 10% of these species at the moment. So there's a huge amount out there. And just thinking about, particularly in this current pandemic situation, how dependent we are on them for things like, penicillin, of course, coming from mold. And there are so many things out there that we don't know yet. We don't understand how they work, or we just haven't discovered them yet, because so many of them are deep under the soil and very, very tiny. So we don't actually know that they exist yet. But the potential out there is enormous. And so keeping healthy soils, ensuring that we've got, good biodiversity, good agricultural practices, and so on, and that we are allowing space for these things to we're not crushing them and putting concrete over the top of everything, is actually really, really important for our own health as a species moving forward. Now, I haven't actually got very deeply into this yet. You can see I'm only just a short way in, so I'm very much.
It sounds fascinating,
It
though.
is.
You can tell us more when
Yeah.
you read more later on. Follow up.
Isn't it true that I think we, as consumers, we're kind of taught that our job is to kill microbes like bacteria and fungi.
Right,
and
exactly. They're the bad guys.
They're the bad guys.
It's the whole antibacterial movement, right?
Exactly, which is, and actually this book kind of plots that history of how, it got into the mindset of society that these were basically bacteria pretty much all bad. And it's pretty much the opposite, that they're pretty much all good, and there's just a few bad ones. And I think, I've certainly had the antifungal spray going in the bathroom here before, which, which basically blinds you to the fact of the dependencies that we're talking about. And I wonder if, there could be a new wave of food products or medicines or health products that are actually based on, bacteria or different strains of them, and health foods, probiotics, probiotics.
Exactly. Yeah. Fermented foods.
Or cleaners that don't kill the good bacteria, right? Or medicines that don't kill, antibiotics that don't kill the good bacteria. That could be the next wave forward. That is our 30 minutes, guys.
Quick.
We're going to have to round it up here. Just an announcement. Please save the date for March 21st. And we are very excited that James's business, Fabric, is also going to be involved in some way, hopefully. That is an all-day event in Tokyo and in Hiroshima on March 21st, which is a national holiday. This week, coming up in the talk show, we have Alex K.T. Martin. This Thursday, he's talking about the Japanese wolf and his articles in the Japan Times, talking with people who are trying to discover whether there are any wolves left in Japan, and talking about why they became extinct. Really interesting. On Friday, talking with Inside Japan Tours, Rob Moran, talking about sustainable travel and the future of more sustainable options for travel in Japan, hopefully when borders open sometime later this year, next year. We are not sure, but we're looking forward to it. So thank you so much, Tove and James. And James, please join us again someday. That was great.
I'd love to. It's been a riot. Thanks, guys. Great way to start the week.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and see you again next week. We'll announce on social media when we decide the day and time. Right, Tove?
Yep. Hopefully announcing that soon.
All right. Everyone, have a great day. Have a great week. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.